All right. We're not going to go 30 seconds. Hey, everybody. I forgot to play the intro. It's been a little while. So, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Doug Thompson Podcast. I have always have great guests, but I've got another one here. I recently met him, introduced to me by our previous guest, Carolyn. I met him at a mixer we had the other day, sweating to death out in the outside of Easy Tiger, a local
Indeed.
Austin place. But Bobby Hulme-Lippert, how are you doing, Lippert? Mr. Lippert.
Hulme-Lippert. I know it's a
Hulme-Lippert.
mouthful. I'm doing great. Thanks. I'm excited to be here, Doug. Thank you.
Thanks. And I wore that. So since you're from Texas, or not from, well, you live Texas.
Yes.
I know you live in Virginia, and we'll forgive you for that. But I wore my Texas Hawaiian shirt for Saturday, and we may spring a Texas test on you here in a little bit just to make sure.
My wife's from Texas, not me. But yeah, go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead.
Just a little bit about your background.
Yes. So I'm originally from Ohio, but in my adult years, I've bounced around in Virginia, Atlanta, LA, now Georgetown, Texas. A lot of that with my background. I, for a long time, was a pastor, Presbyterian pastor, a little bit of Army chaplaincy in there. And about a year or so ago, shifted into leadership coaching. And so I coach individuals, I coach teams, and I also do keynote speaking on leadership and especially what I call the promise of leadership, and that is to care for our people, our work, and ourselves.
The best leaders I've had, and I worked at some large company stuff, were ones that had that in mind. If you put them in a room, you couldn't really tell that they were a leader other than there's an aura about them, but they didn't have that sort of people scared of them, and they weren't the loudest in the room. Often they were the quietest in the room, sort of listening to what went on.
Yes. Aura is a good word. Presence is another, but there is something about those kind of people that can draw out the best of others. And a lot of time it is a fundamental, they have a conviction that they care. Mm-hmm. They really believe in the people. They believe in themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's an unseen energy that comes across, and you get that as a speaker as well with your audience when you're really connecting with them, and there's that energy exchange between speaker and audience.
Yes. I'm part of a Toastmasters here. And yesterday, the Toastmaster was in charge that day. He's been a veteran of 20, 30 years of doing this. And it was just and things were running over and getting a little stressful. And he gets up there and just his presence put everybody at ease. You're like, gosh, that's the gift of someone who just knows what they're doing, but also brings that care, and we're going to be okay.
Now I talked to Leslie. Hey, Leslie, thanks for joining the podcast here. She's actually, I was a guest on a podcast last week, and I was telling about stories, and you tell stories all the time, and you never know that one person that's going to impact. And it happened to be Leslie at the time. Video came across her feed. It was one of my mindset money things. I was actually living in Georgetown back at the time when I did that.
Okay.
Talking to a tree. I had a tree that I talked to a lot, but she saw that one day and it came up, and so she's just launched off saving pets and dogs. And she's just a fantastic person. So Leslie, thanks for joining.
Yes.
But to your point, and where in Ohio are you from? So I have to ask, in that university that's in Columbus, how is that pronounced?
They pronounce it the Ohio State.
Okay,
I grew up in Cincinnati with a lot of Michigan family, which I know is just weird. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, it's a Texas and a Texas A&M thing. It's a lot like that. My wife's from Ohio.
Yes.
Yeah, so she grew up in the sort of eastern part, about midway up. But she got into Texas as fast as she could. That's the way she phrases it.
Excellent.
So, Pastor, how do you? When we were actually lived in Georgetown at the time, we were deciding we were Methodist. So we decided which church to go to. You had Kentthur Rock in Georgetown, not hit a Methodist church. It appeared. Yeah, two right across the street from each other.
That's right. That's right.
And we went to one there, and listened. And actually, it was a and my mind's blanking out now, but we went to one in Round Rock where her husband. So it was a husband-wife type thing where they were, and he was such a good storyteller that we sort of had to land there. It was no effect, but I just, if you have a really good storyteller, it makes all the difference in the world. And in watching some of your videos and listening to your podcast, I can tell you've got that interesting storyteller approach.
And I will say, I stumbled into that. It first happened, honestly, in the Army chaplaincy when I was doing these visits with soldiers who'd come back from untold kind of situations, and we're at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio. And I didn't know how to. I was a young chaplain, just trying to figure out how do you provide care. And eventually, what I learned is the soldiers would tell stories about their time over there, and I would start to help draw their story out for them. And I discovered it was like it was like they were healing in the
Mhm.
story itself by finding a story, like giving themselves a narrative in which to land. And so when I eventually moved into congregational ministry, it wasn't so long that I graduated from this idea that I've got to preach the right thing. Do not screw up. There's people that expect. And then I realized, oh my gosh, the thing that's healing people, opening people, awakening people that they remember, quite frankly, hey, I've got a story too of when I lost my car keys. And let me tell you, stories were the portal every time. And I learned that honestly, in the hospital aspect of the chaplaincy, and began bringing that more and more to my pastoral work, for sure.
Yeah, I like that you touch on that. It's telling a story is cathartic. It helps put it in frame and stuff that, these internal struggles that you have, being able to voice that and share that, it just, you can almost see them sort of just relax a little bit and be more at peace with that.
It really is that stories, I mean, especially for veterans, I've done talks on this, are one of the most powerful ways that healing happens, because there's something about naming and walking through
Mhm.
the naming of in a narrative form. And gosh, just last week, I was speaking at a chamber and everyone's kind of busy, and you can feel the energy of the rooms up here. They're busy, they're making their deals, their calls, their texts, they're trying to get to the lunch. And I open with a story, and you just watch the whole room settle differently in the best kind of way, because it's like, oh, okay. It's almost its own kind of, I mean, no one would use that
Mhm.
word, but healing, because you're coming down into a space that maybe you forgot you even wanted
Yeah,
or needed.
yeah, I mean, it's and this you connect with people. That's where you build that connection, is because the brain's wired for story.
Yeah.
There's been books written about it. And
Yeah.
so translate that into now. I know you're doing some speaking and stuff and all. How does that sort of translate? How does this whole background sort of translate in your journey there?
Sure. It feels like the most natural translation point. I realized as a pastor that stories communicate connection, care, open people into new things. But I got to be honest, there are fewer and fewer people just walking through the doors of the church like they used to be. And I
Mhm.
thought, I think I need to risk going outside the walls myself with this singular tool,
Mhm.
stories,
Mhm.
for the same thing, to build a care in an environment where there's not a lot of care sometimes, to build connection where honestly a lot of us are dealing with disconnect, to build a sense of discovery in an age where every of us are overwhelmed by information. We got too much. And so I love the bridge of story,
Mhm.
but now in these different environments.
Right. Yeah, and it's almost like, so when we do communion at church and we have our one of the lay leaders, he's a youth leader, comes in and he does it. And he'll always ask, and it caught us off guard the first couple of times he asked us, "Has everybody been served?" And we all,
Mm,
"Oh, yeah," looking around, everybody's had their serving, and he says, "No, they're not, because there are people out there outside that didn't get that." That it was just like, so now we're on to him. He can't trick us anymore. But it's sort of like what you're doing there. You're going out to serve a different
mhm.
audience, but it's still connecting with people and still helping make their lives better.
Yes, and every time it's the same thing in terms of uh, it's the story space
Hmm.
that connects. Even that little vignette about communion, right? It just sticks. It's like, has everybody been served? And it's sort of this
Hmm.
invitation, a story kind of invitation.
Yeah, and so you sort of fell into it. Certainly, you were telling stories or something before you got into that somewhere along the line. I mean, when I've talked to greats, they've developed it sometimes unconsciously over time, simply
Yeah.
because of the environment they surrounded them with.
So for me, I really, when I was in Richmond, Virginia, I started attending a writing class on the side, and I don't even
Mhm.
remember what prompted it.
Mhm.
But it was risky because the woman who facilitated would have six people in the room, and she'd say, "Okay, everyone's going to write for 10 minutes with a simple prompt. Do not pick up the pen. That's the only rule. Just keep writing. At the end of 10 minutes, everybody read your piece aloud. Does not matter what it says or where you went." Way vulnerable.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
I start, and you do that 3 times over the course of 2 hours.
Mhm.
But I started to realize there is so much power when you let go of perfection and getting the
Mhm.
right answers and wanting to talk about big things and just letting yourself go into a story. And
Mhm.
usually I say the door is emotion, some kind of little tick that
Yeah.
and you let yourself go. And I was like, I just every time I was like, this is way more powerful than researching all the right answers and talking about the biggest thing I can. And that writing class really opened me up, but it took that kind of vulnerability to discover it.
And maybe I have that problem when I write, and that's sort of why the book is staying in my head, is
Okay. Yeah.
that I try to write and correct at this and edit at the same time, which, those mutually exclusive brain flows. So
Good.
you
Yeah.
spend all this
Well,
time, I got 5 words out. I've worked 3 hours. It's like
good self-awareness. Yeah. There
Yeah.
is something about just getting it out through the deep imperfection and just still going.
Well, that and I have if you go with the Clifton Strengths or whatever they call them anymore, these 35 traits that you have that
Yeah.
are
The
so
strength
unique.
finders. Yep.
Yeah, strength finders type thing, and adaptability is my number one.
Okay.
So and that explains a lot of my through my career and different things like the way products change and stuff like that. But the second one is information. I need to get it. But what happens? I vacillate between the two. Is I'll start getting some information, and I'll there's another shiny object. There's something else I
Yes.
could learn here, right? I have to put parameters. Okay, I've learned enough. I've got enough here, and go
Yes.
do that.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's a
And then
challenge for
that's,
me.
I feel that.
So
Uh,
doing the pastor stuff. You have some great videos, by the way. Go check out. We'll put the links in the show notes of the wedding pants
Thanks.
and stuff. There's really a couple good stories there
Yes.
from that. But you have a podcast too that's like 6 or 7 minutes. It's a really short story, and you were talking about your son calling you out, for not apologizing or something. And having my granddaughter, we get called out a lot. It's amazing how honest they are about calling us out.
Yes. I have this belief that when we were children, kind of
Mhm,
early childhood, maybe up through 9 or 10, we almost wear our souls on our sleeves. Our
mhm.
true, essential, unique essence just shines because we haven't learned to put up guards or
Yeah.
protective whatever. And so I am learning with each passing year that it is my children who are maybe my biggest teachers day
Mhm,
in and day out because they're just shining souls of they just can't help it. And yeah, a recent example, I've got this podcast, Small Stories About Big Things.
mhm,
That's the name of my Substack. That's the name of the podcast. And really it's the audible version of the podcast, right? Or the written Substack.
mhm.
And I just tell the story of Logan calling me out that really I had not apologized to him when I bumped his knee early in the day. And actually I was kind of like, but yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. But he picked up on my energy.
Yeah.
He was saying, "You might have maybe you said the words. Who knows?" My 4-year-old, but that
You
the
didn't
words
feel
don't
it.
count if they don't know that the what we talked about earlier,
Right.
presence.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was looking for the presence, and he called me out middle of a car ride, and we had to stop, pull over, and I
I
apologized.
I love those moments, but they also help put things in perspective too.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
that my granddaughter, and I wrote a story about this a couple of years ago. My granddaughter, youngest daughter and granddaughter live with us. And one morning she woke up and was she upset, and she threw up on the floor, and expecting somebody to freak out. What are you doing? It's the other thing. And she says, "Hey, there's a carrot in there." So so the perspective, it's just like, she's right. There is just like, put some perspective with this. There's
You
something
never
good
know.
or something you can take out of just about anything if you have the right perspective.
That's right. They are perspective givers, gifters, really. I
Yeah.
mean, you just do not know. And it's like, ooh,
Yeah, it's a shame that life beats them into submission that goes on, and that's what we have to try to prevent. What we have to try to encourage
yes.
is that growth, and that's what I'm the phone and stuff. I think is it
Mm.
created a two-dimensional life because you don't have. When I grew up, you had one phone, and if you're lucky, you had a 20-foot cord that you could go around the
That's
walls, and
right.
everybody didn't listen to you.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
but now we're sort of attached to this thing, and this is where when I go coach, I've given this talk to college graduates and master's program,
Mhm.
preparing them corporate life, because I call this your career doesn't have a syllabus, because all through school they have a very rigorous type thing, which they know what it takes to make an A, B, C, whatever, right? They know what it takes to be successful in this very contained world. And unfortunately, a lot of it is independent. It's I succeed over everybody else.
Yeah.
But they also don't know, in the corporate world, it's not that way. You have to there is no syllabus when you're getting out working how to solve a problem. Matter of fact, the more creative you are, be thankful there's no syllabus to do that. Because the more
Yes.
creative you are, then you come up with more innovative designs and stuff. And trying to get them to think differently and tell a story, even like in an interview, they read me their resume and I said, look, I could hire anybody here and not get fired. You're all brilliant, right? I have to look up
Yeah.
every third word in your resume to find out what it means.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why should I hire you of all these other brilliant? Why should I hire you? And they struggle. They can't tell their story because they've never really been told, and they don't, texting and stuff. You get no texture. You get no honesty of the soul on the thing that we talked about, or even in the meeting we had in person. They don't have that. They don't get that 3-dimensional life. It's all sort of 2-dimensional.
Yeah, two thoughts. It's one reason, I do a lot of my coaching, at least the coaching that's here in Georgetown, Austin, on hiking trails with individuals and teams, because the gift of just getting away from the technology is almost revelatory to a lot of people. And it does, nature and all of it opens us. The other thing I learned as a pastor, and this happened in my later years because I didn't realize the need for it for quite a while, and that was that a lot of people don't know where to start with storytelling. They're not sure how. It's like, that feels like creative people do that, or published authors. And so I learned to start staff meetings with things like, let's all share one win from the past week, which is a story invitation. You don't even realize it. Or on Zoom, I would learn to say, what's one object that somehow represents how you're showing up today, or your leadership style, or they didn't know those prompts were essentially inviting them into a narrative. We didn't need to talk about it, but I did realize part of my job was just to ask questions that facilitated practicing that gift. Because then when it's discovered, it feels like everything. It's like, oh, now I am 3D when I show up in the interview or my work or the problem. Yeah.
That makes a lot. And remote work, which is good for some people, not so good for others, right? They need that in-person stuff.
Those prompts, you're kind of working with imperfection. Yeah, it's great to be in person.
Yeah, so that's awkward. But I love that story about your kid calling you out. I've been called out a lot on things.
Yep, you need to apologize, Daddy.
Yeah, and it's okay, fine. And I get to read a lot of books.
He's right.
So I've been reading a lot of books, and we've read this Pinkalicious book. But I enjoy the time. To me, just simplicity and sitting there, watching her look at the book, the pictures, listen to the story. There's this energy exchange just going on, this time between a grandparent and a grandchild. But it's just, you can't replicate that anywhere.
I just talked to a guy who is just stepped into his 80s. And he said, and there are ways that he feels more, and as he's aged, more like young kids than ever. And it's in this. He watches young kids, their brilliance in making all of these connections. You just see it in their face in the book. And he's like, honestly, getting older is hard, he said.
Yeah.
But he said, the gift is you start making or remaking all the connections so much faster between this and this. You just see it. And I thought, Arthur Brooks has written about that in Strength to Strength. That's what the brain does. And I just love that this octogenarian's pointing to the young kids and saying, we're not so different in our ability to really tie it together.
Yeah, and I wonder if maybe he mentions this in the book. Is it because he's not caught up in the 9 to 5 anymore? He's got time to sort of go back and open your mind and focus on life, the things that are around. So sometimes and it's unfortunate that with, like, my mother's has Alzheimer's, and I was there the other day and I wrote a story about this, about all the stories there that they didn't tell will never be told because they can't remember how to, and it just, what a shame that is. The knowledge, and that's one of the frustrating things is they can't tell you even what they had for lunch, which is a pretty simplistic thing. And to me, that's a lot of struggle. That's an unfortunate fact that's come up more.
And that's honestly, that's part of why I try to interrupt people's crazy life with some of my work and call them out to the trails.
Yeah,
Let's
exactly.
hold up. You don't have to wait till you're however long to sort of reflect
Mhm.
and make connections that really matter.
Yeah,
All you do have to just settle away from the phone and into a different kind of space.
yeah.
It'll happen quick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was on a webinar, yesterday. It was a live we had, and the person was leading, I was talking about the 15-minute formula of success, and she says she wrote a whole book about it. Says the key of it is you focus on one thing 15 minutes, and makes your life better, or one project every day. Just do every day 15 minutes. Like, wow, I could 15 minutes sounds easy until it's sort of like you were writing the essay where you couldn't pick up the pen.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my God,
yeah.
that's an eternity until you get into that flow, and then it really does go by.
Right, right. There is wisdom in that, but you're right. It's gonna be tricky to get into
Yeah,
the flow
so you're
sometimes.
writing you got a book that's about to come out, right? So
Yes.
let's talk about that a little bit.
Yes. There it is. I've got a copy right there.
All right, there we go.
Small stories about big things.
Mhm.
And it comes out this week on Thursday on Amazon and a local book launch in Georgetown. But honestly, that was one of those things where I'll tell you the honest truth was in pastoring for a while, there were ways in which I was becoming the robe and losing Bobby. I was
Mm,
becoming the expected role and all the ways that role juggles and sort of almost losing something essential about me.
mhm,
And I started to rediscover me in a host of ways. One of those was, you know what? I just want to write. I'm a writer. I'm going to put out a creative story once a week. And if there's 3 readers, it really doesn't matter. I'm
mm,
going to do this. I need this. So
yeah.
I started on Substack once a week, back in January of 22 or something. And that just turned into one story after another. Always one small little vignette for my life that maybe make a bigger point or a bigger insight. And eventually, a friend helped me realize, Bobby, you've got a book here. You always write about either purpose and
Mhm,
calling,
mhm,
or belonging and connection across difference,
mhm.
leadership, or grace. And now those are different topics; they overlap. But Bobby, you always sort of write in these spaces. What would it look like to really bring that together thoughtfully? Work with some editors, all that, and so that's the product. Our
Yeah,
45 stories over two
cool.
years.
Yeah, definitely want to pick up a read on that. I won't be able to make it out to the Georgetown thing, but
Yeah.
I would. That's really pretty cool. With that, so I'm ready to get mine out. I don't know. I'm writing one more on storytelling as sort of the method where I teach people to tell stories, especially the sales nerds, people like me. Very
Yeah.
brilliant, but they understand ones and zeros and can tell you about an algorithm all day, but couldn't tell you why is that important.
Where do you help? Where do you usually point folks to start when they're just sort of like it's just not me? Where do you go?
When I was talking about people, because everybody's got stories. Again, we're all born and we just forgotten or how to do
Hmm.
that. And I try to. Stories are all around us, and it's like you said, created a story out of the moment with your son the other day, and I think that once you sort of open your mind, you're actually looking for them, manifesting them, if you will.
Yeah.
They're there. You can see them, and you can start connecting those dots, like your brain naturally will do
Yes.
if we clear out all the clutter and stuff that
So true.
21st century or what century? I don't know. But whatever life is today, it's causing us. It's just there's some things that are good about it, but there's
Yeah.
some things that take some of the humanity out of it.
Yeah. But I love that. Yeah. You start with an awareness. They really
Mhm.
are all around. Yeah.
And so then when I have somebody, and it sounds like in your journey you do something similar, is when you're talking with somebody, you're talking with him, but one is you're trying to start a story with their frame of mind or where they're currently at or something like that that resonates with that. You're not talking about something way that really doesn't they don't connect with. Because that again, you're sort of it's the bath water's warm, you're getting in, you get them comfortable, you do the other things in your things. A lot of things are everyday life that we've had. Like I said, I've got a story about that listening to how do you start it like that, right? And get to thinking about if I was them, what
Hmm.
story would impact me? And just sort of a mind shift like that. I find that once you start doing that, things become easier.
Yeah. I will say it's the business minded folks are sometimes are the hardest at first because it's storytelling has a vulnerability to it. And there's a natural inclination to want to tell, well, we
Mm,
were successful and then we got really successful. We came up with a plan and it became more successful. It's like nobody relates to that story.
yeah.
We're going to have to go into the story where there was a break, a fail, a fall.
Hmm. Yeah.
then you're going to feel the real connection and power. But it's about sort of breaking through that that
Yeah,
can be
that
tricky.
vulnerability and admitting that you're human, because that's where the lessons are learned. The lessons are not learned from
Yeah.
successes. The
Yeah.
lessons are learned from two things. One, from a failure or a setback or something, right? Because it's never truly a failure until you quit.
Yeah.
But the other is the resilience from that,
Yeah.
because it's a
Yeah.
resilience that helps you do the recovery. And resilience is
Yeah.
something now that I think we've done our kids a disservice,
Hmm.
because helicoptering, and you didn't want them to fail, and school doesn't back that up, because if you make one bad grade, the whole thing, we
Yep.
haven't taught them resilience. And when something bad happens, it's hard for them.
Hmm.
And I think that causes a lot of it. One thing, it causes some conflict, but it also just causes them to, lose hope. And I think there's a lot of that's where you get a lot of the drug addiction and things like that that come along. There's a hole
Yeah.
there that they haven't learned to use resilience to patch and go.
Speaking of my 4-year-old again, he was jumping, and I promise this relates. He was jumping in a muddy puddle, an icy puddle in Cincinnati, Ohio, when we were home for Christmas, my family home.
Having a good
It
time.
just, it's an ice hole of mud, and his feet get stuck.
Oh,
And we're like, oh gosh. And then I thought, as I'm pulling him out, I'm like, I got to be honest. That's what it feels like to shift from pastoring to entrepreneurship. I want you, Doug, to know the story of from pastoring to great storyteller,
yeah.
speaker, author, and oh yeah, and you can do it too. The real honest truth, if we had another hour, I tell you about the mud. I tell you about
Yeah.
how dang hard it is to keep moving on a road where you don't know precisely where it's going to go and you don't have the
Mhm.
same structure and system. And it's adventurous. It's worth it if you know the calls there, but goodness gracious, it's icy mud. And that would be the real
Yeah.
story.
No, I like that. And but without going through that, it goes back sort of the butterfly story, where they're in the cocoon and this
Yeah.
one's struggling to get out, and this person just feels bad for after a few hours and pulls it out, and it never learns to fly, because part of them being able to fly is working their way out of that cocoon and draining all that fluid stuff out so they can. And
Yeah.
again, I think that's, as you said, that we need help along the way,
W-
but we don't need if somebody does it for us, it's not really helping us.
That's right. In a way, the mud is a gift. It doesn't
Mhm.
always feel like it in the moment, but it really is. And I
Yeah.
and I more and more coming to believe that deeply. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to use that mud story. I kinda like that one. That's pretty, because life is a bit muddy at times.
Yeah.
The best, that's where, if I reflect back, at the time, it's not that much fun, but if I
No.
reflect back, that the mud is a gift. It is, and I look at, God puts us in. He doesn't he doesn't really give us what we want, but he answers our prayers in different ways. Very,
Mm.
it's like my wife asked for patience, and she got cancer from that, but she learned patience to heal and go back to, the things that were taken away, that she learned. God didn't give her cancer. Don't get me wrong on that, but those things in life come along, and it gives you opportunities. And I write about this in the chapter of the book that I co-wrote in, is that
Mm.
I'd been given signs that I was meant to do something else, play bigger stages and do some of these other things to do what I was truly gifted with.
Yeah.
And I was comfortable doing what I'm doing. I'm just sort of, look, I'm really good at this, and that looks hard. That looks muddy. That I don't want.
Mm.
And pretty soon, it's okay. He pushes you in the mud puddle.
Yep.
It's like what Darren says. Okay, it's time to go do
Uh-huh.
something.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Sometimes we're just gonna get muddy one way or another,
yeah.
whether we embrace it or get pushed there.
Yeah,
Um,
and again, it's the knowing that, okay, fine. Now that I'm here, I can either wallow in the mud and say, "Poor pitiful me," or I can get out of it. And it's that humans want to get out of it by nature, and
yes.
that's where, again, the resilience, and the resilience gives you, if you've done this enough time, you know that you can get through it again. And
Yes.
it's, I've got receipts to say, look, I've gotten through tough times before, and I talked to my wife, and I said, look, you've faced death in the face. I can't, that I can't fathom, but
Mm.
she has that grit and determination after having
Yeah.
it. Everything else is just sort of, it's not that big a deal.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, well, you and I both come out of this Judeo Christian tradition where every hero or leader of the faith
Mhm.
went through the wilderness. The wilderness is actually pivotal, not like some people had to do that.
Yeah.
It's fundamental. And then the essential story that anchors the whole thing is 3 days of complete darkness, out of which it emerges light.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
mean, there's something to that.
Yeah. Thanks, Leslie, for hanging in. She's a good author too. She's got a great book out. As look her up, connect with her on
Okay.
LinkedIn. She's a great person to
Yeah.
follow. Has been a big supporter of mine when I didn't think I had. Yeah, you don't think that your stories are landing, or sometimes we get in this. Why am I doing this? And all it takes is the one person like Leslie to sort of reignite the fire to know, okay, I've made a connection. I have connected with
Yeah.
somebody that did
What a
that
gift.
set something off that they would go do something else and they'd be great. That's why I like mentoring people, or in your case,
Mm,
coaching people, and
yeah.
that you
Yeah.
watch them do things with the tools that you've given them that you couldn't do
Mhm.
yourself, and they're on this whole new level that they're always destined for, but they were holding themselves back.
So rewarding. So rewarding.
So
Yeah. I see. Our kinship is multiple levels.
yeah, I knew that from
The
our first
stories, the
conversation, and I want to
coaching.
thank Carolyn for introducing us and all on that one. So,
Yeah.
Bobby, where do we find you? Where do we get a hold of you?
Easiest. I'm very active on LinkedIn, Bobby Hulme-Lippert, and then my website's bhl.coach.
Mhm.
bhl.coach, and you can learn all the details about not the coaching, but the speaking, the book, all the things. It's there. Yeah.
Cool, and watch. He's got get to Substack. He's got great stuff there as well.
Yeah. Small stories
And
about big things. The Substack.
so the Texas. What's the next response after this phrase? The stars
Oh
at
boy,
night are big and bright.
deep in the heart of Texas.
Nope, you fail. It's
No.
3 claps. Then you can say that.
Then I see. Yeah. Oh, still a novice. And I was at the UT women's volleyball game last night with my family, and they played
Oh,
that a
they put
dozen
on a
times.
good show. I always have to. My daughter that's our code around the house. Somebody will say that, and if you don't respond with the claps, they come looking for you. They think something's wrong with you.
I
So,
appreciate that. I'm
and,
gonna
and
I'm
I've
gonna get
and I've
that
got
one
the
next
Texas
time.
Hawaiian shirt on, so I was trying to get really in the spirit. Hey, and if you're looking for speakers out there, stop in Austin, because I've met so many quality ones here that do such a great job, like Bobby and some of the others that I've talked to here. There's just a fountain of wisdom, entertainment,
It's
and
an
youth, and you
incredible
can't
crew.
you can do a lot worse than coming to Austin to find a good speaker. So now,
Oh,
Bobby, thanks a
absolutely.
lot, and continue the good work. Look forward to the book.
You too. Really appreciate this, Doug. A lot of fun.
Thanks, and thanks, Leslie.